Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I am Jessica Holteen, the Assistant Manager of Education at the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. On behalf of our CEO, Susan Abrams, our Board of Directors, volunteers, and staff, I would like to thank you for being here for this very special book and author program discussing the new book, Voices from Srebrenica, Survivor Narratives of the Bosnian Genocide by Petrila and Hasanović. As an institution, we are grounded in the history and dedicated to preserving the legacy of the Holocaust. We do this by honoring the memories of those who are lost and capturing the survivor stories to teach universal lessons. In 1993, the international community promised the inhabitants of Srebrenica that they would be safe from the surrounding Bosnian Serb army. Srebrenica was declared a safe haven by the United Nations, and the people were told they would be protected. But on July 11th, 1995, the Bosnian Serb army entered Srebrenica, separating the men and women, and murdered approximately 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys. The targeting and killing of Bosnian Muslims at Srebrenica was declared a genocide by the international community and international courts. This atrocity is commemorated every year at the Srebrenica Memorial Center in Petrila, where women bury their family members who were killed. It is a day we remember and honor those who were lost and recognize the crime of genocide. In this age of historical revisionism and genocide denial, it is our job to tell the stories of the people who were lost. So many of the survivors in the book that we will discuss today said that they speak because everybody needs to know the truth about what happened at Srebrenica. They are compelled to speak up for those that are no longer here to tell their stories. Today, we will have a discussion with the authors of the book, Voices of Srebrenica, with Petrila and Hasanović. The authors have worked hard and continue to work hard to make sure the survivors of Srebrenica's voices are heard. It is an honor to have them here and speak to us and talk more about their efforts to educate and combat genocide denial. Hasan would call everybody in attendance today an advocate. He states in the book, the crime of genocide is not just a crime against a particular group, it is a crime against the whole of humanity. So together today, we must take a stand and speak up for humanity. I would like to thank all our community partners listed on our opening slides for their continued support. Finally, at the end of the program, we will take questions. You can use the Q&A function. We will answer as many questions as we can. It is now my honor and distinct pleasure to introduce today's moderators. Sefer, the president of the board of directors for the Bosnian-American Genocide Institute and Education Center, and Dr. David Pettigrew, professor of philosophy and Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Southern Connecticut State University, as well as secretary of the board of directors of the Bosnian-American Genocide Institute and Education Center. Welcome.
Thank you so much. My name is Sefer, and I'm the president of the Bosnian-American Genocide Institute, much like Jessica noted. Thank you so much for joining us today in this discussion of the collection of stories and testimonies provided to us by genocide survivor Hasan Hasanović and Petrila. First, I wanted to thank Jessica Holteen and the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center for co-hosting this panel. We've been collaborating with the museum for about 6 years now, and we are grateful for their partnership and space and resources that they continuously provide for us in order to keep educating the public about the genocide in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I also wanted to express my gratitude to the Srebrenica Memorial Center for partnering with us and the Illinois Holocaust Museum to mark the 25th commemoration of the Srebrenica genocide in July of 2020. And for the participation in the program today. Genocide is a deliberate and planned method of targeting a group of people with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. While we discuss the genocide in Bosnia and Herzegovina today, and in particular the genocide in Srebrenica, I want us to remember that this history we are discussing did not happen a long time ago. This happened in the 1990s, and that the project of genocide in Bosnia is ongoing through what Haris Halilović termed the 11th stage of genocide, that being triumphalism. Two of our speakers today, Emir Suljagić and Hasan Hasanović, are survivors who currently live in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and are continuously battling this triumphalism machine. So while we listen to them speak today, I want us to remember that not only are they speaking about facts that have been proven through thousands of hours of verified testimonies and documentation, that they additionally speak from their own experiences. So I wanted to thank Hasan and Emir for being with us and as survivors, and for dedicating their careers and free time to sharing these stories so that they will not be forgotten. And without allies like Anne Petrila, who dedicate their time and energy in educating students about the genocide in Bosnia, we would not be able to amplify these stories in the way that we have over the last 20 years. So thank you, Anne, as well. Lastly, I wanted to acknowledge the survivors that we have on the call, and also remember the victims who are not here with us. And to remind everyone who is present today that we continue to provide this as education in an effort to honor the thousands of people who were murdered, imprisoned, sexually assaulted, kidnapped, and tortured in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But in particular today, to remember the 8,372 people who were murdered in Srebrenica. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Emir Suljagić. Emir Suljagić is the director of the Srebrenica Memorial Center and a survivor of the Srebrenica Genocide. For 2 years, he was the only Bosnian journalist covering the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia proceedings in The Hague. He has served as the Minister of Education of Sarajevo Canton and the Deputy of the Minister of Defense of Bosnia and Herzegovina. He has authored numerous books and articles about the Srebrenica Genocide and is a professor of international relations at International University of Sarajevo. I would like to invite Emir to please speak now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ida. Thank you for inviting me. But before I actually say what I came here to say, I'd like just to make a few points beforehand. First of all, I probably do not have the most stable internet connection in the world. So if the connection starts breaking up or anything, I might be forced to turn off the video feed, because in my experience, that's how sometimes it actually works better. Number two, I apologize. I saw a name, and I want to use this as a sort of an opportunity to an opening into what I'm about to say. I saw a name among the attendees that's very familiar, and I probably by mistake sent a message that was intended privately to everyone. So I apologize for that. But it's Sheridan Mckinney, and Sheridan was part of the campaign that I led here back in 2012 when it was a grassroots campaign. David Pettigrew was also part of that, when we actually beat the genocide deniers in Srebrenica in an election campaign. And that was one of the most rewarding moments for me after the war. And why I'm saying that, this book, in very many ways, is one of the expressions of what we were trying to do back then. It fills what I believe is the gaping hole in the narrative of Srebrenica. It expands on the existing narrative. I apologize. I really do. I'm sorry. Just hold on a second. I'm going to have to turn this off because I have somebody knocking on my window. I'm sorry. Važi. Dobro. I'm sorry about this. This was my neighbor. She lives alone in the house next to me. Her husband was shot in 1992, and it brings me to what I wanted to say earlier, which is that the book that Hasan and Anne wrote complements the existing narrative, which is mainly based on judicial evidence, that it brings this different side of humanity to the narrative and to the debate of Srebrenica. Our understanding of what's going on is based mainly on this very robust judicial approach. And we need to expand on that. We need to, because there are so many stories that have never been told. And Anne and Hasan have made sure that some of these stories are actually told, but that they're told outside the courtroom, that they're told in actual real life. The judicial prosecution of what was going on in Bosnia happened thousands of kilometers away from Srebrenica, away from Bosnia, in a foreign language, and it remained somehow inaccessible to Bosnians. 25 years after, Bosnians are actually only now beginning to tell their own story. And I think that what Hasan and Anne wrote is a great contribution to that. And that's why I really would like to recommend this book for everyone who would like to get a better understanding of what the human cost of what happened in Srebrenica really and actually is. When you sit in a courtroom, it's sometimes the things that you see, the events that are unfolding, or the event that is unfolding in front of you, can be very abstract. It's very difficult to imagine 100 people. How many space do they take up? But getting the story from one individual who is telling you, what happened to him, how he survived, how he feels, is something that's been missing. And I think Anne and Hasan have identified it very correctly, and tried to rectify this, what I believe is a structural failure of the post-war approach to what happened in Bosnia. Bosnia was not a footnote, or at least was not a footnote that it is now being made to look like. Bosnia happened in Europe. It happened at a time when Europeans were enjoying unprecedented prosperity, at a time when history was rushing towards its end, and pretty much the rest of the world enjoyed the kinds of freedoms and prosperity that has no precedent in human history. And at that same time, there was a group of people in the Balkans, in Europe, in Bosnia, that were literally sentenced to die. Now, I think that's what needs to be understood, and I think that's what needs to be understood from this book, because it's very often, it's what's missing very often from what we have on the judicial record. Judicial record is about establishing individual criminal responsibility, and that's fine. That's completely fine. But we need to see the bigger picture. We need to see this tapestry of human lives that exists still somehow in the background of this the judicial prosecution. So I think that's why this book is actually important in so many ways. And the fact that it's actually being told in English is something that I'd love to see this book in Bosnian as well. But I think that what it does in English is it has a bigger and better reach, and it has better prospects of rectifying this once again sort of collective and general failure to understand what really went on in Bosnia. So now I would also like to say that this is, I'd like to talk a little bit about Hasan. I somehow feel like I owe that to him. I met Hasan years ago, naturally, but I've only began to work closer with him about a year and a half ago when I came to, when I was appointed the director of the memorial. And this book was kind of, it feels like, like that right now. This book was an opening into what Hasan has been working on over the past, year and a half, which is oral history. And he brings the kind of understanding to this process and to this project and to this conversation, the kind of understanding, the kind of knowledge, the kind of passion that only a survivor can. And I want to also use this opportunity to say that the fact that we are survivors doesn't make us any less competent on the matter. People like Hasan and many other survivors have very often been disqualified based on the fact that they're actually survivors. Because for some reason, survivors are supposed to be objective about surviving genocide. And I want to also thank Anne for seeing beyond this, for understanding that there is the kind of knowledge and the kind of expertise and the kind of passion that's required for a book like this that only a survivor can bring to the table. And I thank you both for the effort that you have made. I also want to thank Hasan for being a support and helping us use his book as a platform for the struggle and for the mission of the Srebrenica Memorial Center. You are both very generous people, and I can only imagine that the amount of work and energy and nerves that have gone into this book will probably never be matched by any material benefit that you can get from this. And I, once again, it's I'm sorry. It's a book that I would once again like to recommend to everyone out there, everyone watching this. I'd also like to apologize for my neighbors. She brought me a home cooked meal because I'm staying here alone. And once again, she was married to my relative who was shot summarily in 1992 with the rest of my family. It's the kind of, welcome to post-genocide Srebrenica, or whatever you call this area around Srebrenica. So once again, apologies for that. Other than that, I think I'd like to stop here now, and I'm available for any questions later on.
Thank you so much, Emir, and no need to apologize. I feel like that sheds light on the fact that this topic has been so sanitized through the courts, through other academic research, that people often forget that there's real human beings behind these stories. And I feel like this, your neighbor interrupting was 100% that. It's like, we have to remember these are real people who have real lives, who continue to resist and still live there. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'm going to introduce Anne next. Anne Petrila is a professor of the practice and coordinator of global initiatives at the University of Denver's Graduate School of Social Work, and is the co-author of Voices from Srebrenica that she co-authored with Hasan Hasanović. And her areas of expertise include global cultural perspectives, trauma, and genocide. Every summer, she leads an experiential Bosnia-based course and internship program for the University of Denver graduate students. She's dedicated to raising awareness and telling the truth about the genocide in Bosnia. And now I would like to invite Anne to tell us a little bit more about the book, about herself. Go ahead, Anne.
Thank you, Ida. And I would also like to thank the other organizers of this event and your very, very many community partners. I clearly remember on July 13th, 1995, I was driving to teach a class at the Graduate School of Social Work, where I taught occasionally back then. I was listening to NPR and Linda Wertheimer was talking about reports that were beginning to come out of Bosnia, focusing on the fall of Srebrenica and the unknown fate of thousands of men and boys who were missing. Now, some 25 years later, I no longer have to wonder what that was about or if those men and boys were ever found. Having the incredible privilege of now calling Bosnia a second home, I know all too well what happened in Srebrenica. And though it's a horrifying story, it's one that we all need to hear. And there's no better way to hear it than from those who survived it. The first time I went to Srebrenica, I was with Bosnian friends who had never been there before. That day, we met a Bosnian man who had just started working at the Genocide Memorial Center as a curator. He had survived the genocide and spent his days telling the story of what happened in Srebrenica, as well as his own personal story. His name was Hasan Hasanović, and I couldn't know at the time that he would become a colleague, a dear friend, and a partner in writing this book. I'd been taking students each summer to Bosnia for several years, and I realized that I needed to gain a greater understanding of the war and the genocide if I was going to be teaching others about it. As part of the summer programs, I took students to Srebrenica, where Hasan was always our teacher. I remember asking him if he could recommend a good book about Srebrenica so that I could learn more. He told me that the book I needed didn't exist, and I certainly wasn't going to be able to find what I was looking for written in English. He said that if I could find a way to spend a few weeks in and around Srebrenica, he would teach me everything that he could. Figuring out a way to accept that offer was truly one of the best decisions that I have ever made. A short time later, Hasan invited me to join him and women from the Mothers Associations on July 13th, when they visited the main execution sites around Srebrenica and memorialized them with prayer, flowers, and remembrance. These sites include a warehouse, fields, schools, a large dam, and a cultural center. They are intentionally made difficult to visit and contain no markers identifying them as execution sites. We were in buses going to each of these sites, and it seemed to me like we were backtracking and sometimes going in circles. As it turns out, we were, as we were visiting the sites in the order of the executions, and I wondered how anyone could find these sites on their own, and Hasan told me that they couldn't. As you can imagine, visiting these sites for the women was excruciating. Their husbands, fathers, brothers, sons, and other male relatives had been executed there. It was a time where I was in the presence of such raw and unimaginable grief, and while I felt so honored to be there, I wasn't sure that it was my place to be. That is a question I've asked myself countless times in Bosnia. Should I be there in such intimate moments in a culture that is not my own? Questioning how to ethically work in cultures that are not our own is something that should never stop. As we listened to a young man named Nejad talk about his survival in a school where he had been imprisoned and at the dam where he was only one of 2 survivors out of 1,500 who were executed there, I began to think about his and other stories of survival could only be heard by those fortunate enough to spend time in Srebrenica. Then we made the last stop at the Petrila Cultural Center where Hasan's father had been killed, which is the worst place I have ever been in my life. For those of you who have seen our book, it is the cover photo. It's like the set of a slasher film, except it's real and it feels haunted. There's a stage where the 500 men and boys who were trapped in there tried to hide, which was impossible. You can feel their fear. There were no survivors from this site. It was there that day that Hasan and I decided we needed to somehow preserve the stories of those who had survived and those who didn't, in a way that could reach a larger audience. There are so many people who know so little about Bosnia and who have never heard of Srebrenica. And that's how the journey of writing this book began, a journey that took us 5.5 years from start to finish. Originally, we wanted to write a book that contained a great deal of factual information about Srebrenica before, during, and after the genocide. And we hoped to tell the story of the 10 survivors of the execution sites. Of the thousands of men and boys taken to these sites, only 10 survived. All along, we knew that we wanted to write about survivors' experiences using their own words and their own narratives if they were interested in their stories being told in a way that could possibly reach beyond Bosnia. We realized it wouldn't be possible to talk with all 10 survivors for a number of reasons, but we were able to talk to several. In thinking more about our goal of preserving oral histories from survivors, we realized that this book would be far richer if we expanded our idea. We then added many more people to our list of those who we hope might be interested, including those who survived the genocide in the Death March, like Hasan did. We also included women who had lost some or all of their male relatives and who are now alone, as well as others. We kept adding people, promising we wouldn't add any more, breaking that promise over and over again. And if the truth be told, it was always Hasan having an idea about adding somebody, me saying that we couldn't, and then we did, and it was always the right decision. At the very beginning, when we talked about writing this book, I was so honored that Hasan wanted to do it together. It's his country, his culture, his story, yet he invited me to partner with him to do it. I felt a great responsibility to get this right, and we did our best to do so. As I was trying to get my head around what we were hoping to do and how we might do it and the ethics involved and on, Hasan had already gotten on the phone and contacted most of the people who ultimately ended up in this book because he knows them all. Those that he didn't know, he was able to contact because someone close to him knew them. They knew Hasan and they trusted him without exception. And by extension, they trusted me. When Hasan explained what we were hoping to do, to my surprise, but not to Hasan's, every person eagerly agreed to talk with us and gave us permission to include their stories in this book. They all said they wanted to talk to us, wanted us to tell their story of what happened because people need to know, especially because there is a tremendous culture of denial, including sometimes from their own neighbors who were perpetrators of the genocide. They wanted their stories to be told and to be believed. It was, not surprisingly, very difficult for people to tell their stories. We always gave them multiple options to stop, but they all wanted to continue in spite of how hard it was for them. That is how much they want the truth to be recognized. At the beginning, several people were protected witnesses at the War Crimes Tribunal at The Hague, and they did not want their names to be used. By the time we were close to publication, however, each of them requested that we use their real names because they wanted a public record of what had happened to them. We met with people in whatever place they chose. Sometimes it was in their home, many times in cafes or coffee shops, in parks or wherever they wanted to meet. We recorded the interviews and Hasan translated during those that were conducted in Bosnian. This resulted in hundreds of pages of transcripts that had to be turned into chapters. I told Hasan early on that my goal was to write this book in a way that readers would get to know and to care about these people the way that I did. I knew it wasn't okay to just write about the tragic part of their lives for a couple of reasons. One, it's barely tolerable to just read about one atrocity after another. And most importantly, that would not be fair to these incredible people. They are so much more than their tragedy. We tried our best to learn about their lives before the war, what they thought they wanted to be when they grew up, and so on. But for many of them, it was seemingly impossible to talk about much more than the genocide and their sorrow. I think we succeeded in presenting these narratives that not only include tragedy and sorrow, but also senses of humor, generosity, hopes, dreams, determination, and resilience. We were very far into this book when we received feedback that it would be important to include something from the Serbian side. We were not interested in including perpetrators or genocide deniers, but we were very interested in learning about 4 human rights activists in Belgrade who had, from before the war, been working toward human rights, anti-war activities, truth-telling, and so forth. As usual, I did not think we had any more room in this book, and as usual, Hasan thought we needed to talk with these people. But this time there was a twist. In order to meet with them, we needed to go to Belgrade in Serbia. But Hasan didn't think that he could go. He can talk more about that if he chooses to. But he thought I should go, which I wasn't going to do without him. He was the reason that people met with us, so if he wasn't going, I wasn't going. And after some time, though, and with a huge push from his brother, he agreed he would go. From start to finish, we spent almost 24 hours traveling to and from Bosnia to Belgrade, meeting with amazing people who, like everyone else, were so generous with their time. It was a day of adventures, and in the end, it was the right thing to do, as it added a perspective to our book that we would not otherwise have. In addition to the personal narratives of survivors and enough history to provide a context for these stories, we have also included a look at the verdicts from the ICTY War Crimes Tribunal, the psychological ramifications of intense, individual, cumulative, and collective trauma, including organized and pervasive sexual violence, primarily against women, and the responsibility of the international community, in particular, the United Nations. In closing, I would like to say it was very important for us to include lessons learned from Bosnia in this book. What happened in Bosnia can happen anywhere. The role that nationalism, propaganda, media control, assaults on the press, and a pervasive system of lies and dehumanizing language stoked such hatred that thousands of people were convinced to slaughter thousands of their neighbors and fellow citizens. Genocide doesn't just suddenly happen. All genocides follow the same stages, and they all include these things just mentioned. It's crucial for each of us to pay close attention when hate-based, dehumanizing language riles people up in a dangerous way, and to things like Muslim bans and other policies designed to denigrate a particular group of people, not to mention intentionally false information being delivered as factual news. Over the past 4 years, and including now, we have seen the direct connection between dehumanizing language and violence against people based on their identities. Not only do we need to pay attention, but we each need to figure out what our responsibility is for addressing human rights violations in some way as soon as they begin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. I really appreciate that introduction. And I'm excited to ask questions further along those lines. Now, I would like to introduce Hasan Hasanović. Hasan Hasanović survived the genocide, but other family members did not, including his twin brother and his father. He educates thousands of visitors each year at the Srebrenica Memorial Center. He's frequently interviewed by the international press and has been a keynote speaker at many, many events at universities and schools in other numerous countries. He's a permanent member of the Peace March Organization Committee, established to mark an annual anniversary of the Srebrenica Genocide. He has addressed the Scottish House of Parliament and the Flemish House of Parliament. With the support of the Scottish First Minister, he published a short memoir of his experience entitled Surviving Srebrenica through Lumpannon Press, which was translated into Italian, Flemish, and German. A revised edition of his memoir is to be published soon in Scotland. He co-authored Voices from Srebrenica, Survivor Narratives of the Bosnian Genocide with Anne Petrila. And he has been working on a number of projects regarding the Srebrenica genocide to ensure that it will not be forgotten. He's currently the head of the Oral History Project at the Srebrenica Potocari Memorial Center and Cemetery. And now I would like to invite Hasan to share his personal story, as it is one of the stories featured in the book that he co-authored with Anne Petrila. Hasan?
I want to thank to all organizers for organizing this book launch for us and all partners involved tonight. I was born in a small village outside of Srebrenica, a village which is not different from any other villages in this part of the world, especially at that time. So I had a pretty happy childhood. My mother gave birth to me and my twin brother Hussein. I also had a younger brother. I remember when I started going to school, I had to walk really long distances to my school. But it was very fun because, you know, along the way we would play different games and eat lots of different fruits and swim in nearby lake. But we had to hurry back home to help our parents to work the fields, to take care of our animals. My village was really beautiful village. We produced everything, and everyone was very, very healthy. Both of my grandfather worked in Croatia. They also built another house in Bratunac. So when I left primary school, When I finished it, I was about to start to go to secondary school, and I moved to Bratunac, where my father built another house. It was a really big change for me in terms of culture, in terms of everything, because I was a village boy. So at the time when I moved there, we had already the first democratic elections, then a referendum on independence of Bosnia followed, and the nationalism was I would say hitting the roof, and everything in terms of relations between Bosniaks and Serbs, everything has changed and deteriorated to such an extent that any minute, any moment it could spark, and it did. Not shortly later, I had to leave my school, and Bratunac was occupied by mostly paramilitary units from Serbia, alongside with local Serb military organized by the Serbian Democratic Party. So they ethnically cleansed all Bosniak Muslim population from Bratunac, which was 64% of the entire population. So I was one of those people who had to leave Bratunac, and I ran with my family, leaving my house and everything behind. We walked for about 20 kilometers through the woods to a Muslim village where my father had his sister. So then after a while, after a couple of weeks, we ended up in Srebrenica, because Srebrenica was a town which villages offered resistance against the Serb occupation, which led to the liberation of Srebrenica, which was occupied in the middle of April. So it was liberated at the beginning of May, and basically Srebrenica's enclave was created, and all the refugees from that part of Eastern Bosnia moved there to shelter because of Serb occupation. So we ended up living in my uncle's apartment. He moved to Tuzla prior to war with his family. Then I visited my village. I wanted to know what happened to my grandparents. Sadly, my grandfather died. My grandmother died from the father's side. All people from my village, my beautiful village, was burned down by our Serb neighbors. People ended up living in forest, living in huts. There were huts for people and huts for animals. And it was so sad seeing people who had pretty civilized lives before the war and ended up living in that forest like animals. They just wanted to stay alive and to collect their food. And that's what we did there, collecting food at night using moonlight, because we knew that there was a severe ongoing starvation in Srebrenica. So after an attack, all people left the forest. I left the forest prior to this attack with my brothers. My parents later followed us in Srebrenica, and we were together again. So we lived in Srebrenica, and as I mentioned, we had a really terrible starvation from the end of '92 to the mid of April 1993. Prior to the arrival of the United Nations, the Serb the siege was being tightened, and more refugees were arriving downtown Srebrenica. So situation downtown Srebrenica was really going off the edge, and the town was overcrowded, and so many people were dying because of the shooting and shelling. The hospital was overcrowded with the wounded. They had nothing to help the wounded, to treat their wounds, like anesthesia, etc. So then Philip Morion, the commander of the United Nations, arrived, promising a protection for Srebrenica people. I was there during his speech when he gave this promise. And we were just later waiting for a resolution to be passed by the United Nations, which would declare Srebrenica as a safe area. 2 days prior to the official proclamation, I went to play football at the playground, and sadly, the playground was shelled, and one of the shells fell 4 meters in front of me as I sat on one of the bleachers watching the 2 groups of boys playing football, and I went a knob. I fainted, and when I woke up, all boys and my friends around me were massacred, headless, armless, legless, and I was really scared. And then I ran back home after the shelling. And this was the first big trauma in my life, but I could not anticipate that it was just the beginning. So then, Srebrenica was proclaimed as safe area. The United Nations arrived, both first Canadians, then followed by Dutch a year later. And we had later a peaceful period till June and July 1995. During this time, I went back to school, and I tried to learn English, try to play music. We tried to improvise our lives to the best we could there. I had friends, my best friends in my life from that time, even now. Sadly, many of them are not alive anymore. In July 1995, sadly, Srebrenica came under an attack again, in spite of the UN presence. The Dutch soldiers, Dutch battalion, did not do anything to stop these attacks, which led to the fall of Srebrenica on July 11th, 1995. My mother, younger brother, grandparents from the mother side went to Potocari, to hoping to be protected by the United Nations, by the Dutch battalion main base there. While my twin brother, my father and my uncle, we decided to take the other way through the woods. We called this Death March. And just at the very beginning, I lost the sight of my father and my twin brother and my uncle due to the shooting, and I never saw them ever again. So I spent additional 6 days and 6 nights being hunted through this forest like animals, right? Like an animal. I had no food. Even sometimes I was dying for water. I was constantly scared. I did not sleep for 6 nights at least. I could not wrap my head around what was happening. I thought that was just a bad dream. All this time, I was thinking what happened to my loved ones. If I will ever see them again. I was thinking this could not be the end of my life. I'm, way too young. Only 19. So I never lost that hope to survive, and I did. On July 16th, 16th of July, 1995, I came to the free territory after 6 days and six nights, totally drained away because of a lack of food and water and everything else, especially being afraid all the time. And then after a couple of weeks, I reunited with a part of my family at Tuzla Airport, where I found my younger brother, mother, grandfather, and grandmother from the mother's side. I spent a couple of months at the airport living in a tent. There were thousands of tents where refugees from Srebrenica lived, waiting for their loved ones to come to Srebrenica, mainly men and boys who never came alive. They were murdered. So I went back to school shortly. Then I worked as an interpreter to the US Army. Then later, went to the university. Then in 2009 started to work at Srebrenica Genocide Memorial. All those years I was wondering what happened to my father and my twin brother and my uncle. And I buried my father in 2003 on the 30th of September, when ex-US President Bill Clinton when he inaugurated the Srebrenica Genocide Memorial. So there were thousands of people there and lots of international press. And the local Serb police in Bratunac told us that we couldn't get there by buses. We had to walk from this small town, which was about a mile or so. As we started to walk through the streets, as we got off those buses, angry crowd of Serbs on both sides of that street was there, yelling out, shouting, yelling out unbelievable insults, calling us Turks, animals, spitting on us. So I was being spat at while I was going to bury my father. And that was one of the worst days in my life. I was absolutely, humiliated and dehumanized that day. So after burial of my father, I buried my twin brother 2 years later, which was the most difficult day in my life. I had to put bones of my twin brother, who I lived with, who I was born with, who I wore the same clothes with, like him, who I dearly loved, and I had to bury his bones just because of what he was. He was just killed because of what he was, and he was just a student. When I spoke in Glasgow 5 years ago in one of the synagogues, I was asked a question about forgiveness, if I would forgive. I said, I might forgive if I decide to one day on my behalf, but on the behalf of my father and my twin brother and my uncle, I cannot forgive because I don't have that right. Knowing, that they were murdered, thrown in mass graves, and they were hungry and thirsty, and they might have been tortured as well. When I just think of these things, these are the most difficult moments when when I think about these things which they had to go through. Who could even tell that after 4 years, after these two burials, which actually destroyed me both physically and psychologically, that I would gather strength to work at the memorial. And I'm at the memorial for over 12 years, and I do my best to tell the truth and to work to make sure that the history is remembered, that the victims are remembered. And my director, Emir Suljagić, mentioned the very important project of oral history, and I'm very proud that I'm working on that. And apart from this book, now I have a chance to videotape, interview people who have the same experience, even worse experiences than I do. And I'm honored to record these stories for history, for future generations. And beside the facts from the Hague Tribunal, from the international courts, we also need personal accounts from survivors, from families, in order to have the complete picture of what happened in July 1995.
Thank you, Hasan, so much. We are so grateful that you're here with us, and that no one grows up thinking that one day they're going to be educating people about genocide. I don't think that's like a childhood want, right? So we appreciate the burden that you've taken upon yourself, in addition to obviously sharing your story, and we're very grateful for you. Next, I would love to ask David, Dr. David Pettigrew, to kick off our question and answer session. And we're going to be answering a few questions.
Hello, Thank you, Ida. And let me add my thanks to the Illinois Holocaust Museum for co-hosting our book panel with the Bosnian-American Genocide Institute. And thanks to Jessica and Ida for all their help organizing the program. My thanks to Emir, Hasan, and Anne for their collaboration on the publication of this important book and participating in today's program. And thanks to our friend Christian Ski for taking photographs for the book. Now, we would like to put forth some discussion points, but first I wanted to especially thank Hasan for sharing his story with us today. I'd like to start us off with a question for the whole panel. To set the context, in July 2018, I attended the official opening of the Shehidska Jamia, a mosque dedicated to the victims of the Srebrenica genocide from the Petrila neighborhood. It had been rebuilt in Srebrenica with the support of an Atlanta businessman from Srebrenica named Meho Tepic. Mr. Tepic was there, and the head of the Islamic community in Bosnia, the Rais Ulema Hussein Kavazovic, was also there and addressed the crowd. There was a large crowd gathered. Many were in town for the annual July 11th commemoration of the Srebrenica genocide and collective burial of the victims whose human remains had been identified from mass graves. A crowd filling the streets that winds up the hill. And when Rais Ulema was speaking, he said it was a hopeful, sign that life was returning to Srebrenica after the genocide. And as he was saying this, he began to weep. It was a very emotional moment for everyone. As he was reflecting on the difficulty, experiencing the difficulty, better say, the near impossibility of living again in Srebrenica, where the genocide occurred, in a place where, in a sense, the world had been destroyed. Over 20 mosques were destroyed, which reminds us of Raphael Lemkin's description of a second phase of genocide, involving the erasure of the cultural traces of the targeted group. In your book, there are a number of voices of those who have, against all odds, returned to live in Srebrenica, including two members of our panel, Emir and Hasan. By against all odds, I mean their family members were murdered. Their world was all but erased. The genocide is denied today and even celebrated. Convicted perpetrators are glorified, and returnees face intimidation and re-traumatization every day. It seems that Republika Srpska seeks to prevent refugee return in order to achieve 25 years later their genocidal goal of ethnic homogeneity. There are voices from the different section of the book who have returned, including from Chapter 1, Execution Site Survivors, Chapter 2, Death March Survivors, and Chapter 4, Mothers of Srebrenica. Hasan has returned. Nejad Avdic, who survived at an execution site with multiple wounds, has returned and is raising a family. And Mother Saliha Osmanović, whose husband and two sons were murdered, has returned to live in stark isolation in the village of Dobrak on the river across from Serbia. I visited Mother Saliha in November of 2018, and I remember she has a great photo of Anne in her kitchen. So I wondered if you could reflect on the courage it takes to return. Do you see this return as a form of resistance and a memorialization? In a BBC interview in 2017, Nejad said the fight for justice is not finished, and perhaps returning to Srebrenica is the best answer to those who deny the genocide. It seems, and this is something that Emir seemed to allude to, that your book, in a way, is part of a return to Srebrenica. So I wondered if you could comment on the challenges and the importance of returning to the homes from which people were forcibly expelled by atrocities that have been judged to be genocide. Thank you.
Maybe Emir should go first.
Go ahead, Hasan. You talk first. This is your book.
So the return to Srebrenica started around 2000. So I want to emphasize the role of the memorial, of the physical existence of the memorial here, and its contribution towards the return of refugees here. So if it wasn't for the memorial, I think maybe just a few people would have returned by now. So because of the existence of the memorial, many people, actually not many people, but a number of people have returned. So it's a really small percentage comparing to let's say 28,000 people who live in Srebrenica municipality prior to the genocide. I'm talking about Bosnian Muslims, and probably now not more than 3,000 people, Bosnian Muslims, live here, which is a minority, which actually speaks volumes about the aftermaths of the genocide. So of course, at first, people came across lots of obstacles in their return, starting from the local municipality, the local Serb authorities who had hindered that process at the time. So with the collaboration of the international community, it was later easier, and especially because of the international attention towards the genocide and memorial. So it was easier for people to live here. But sadly, because of the physical existence of Srebrenica within the Republic of Srpska, not big number of people have returned. So many think, okay, I will have to return to a place which is called the Republika Srpska, and there is the Republika Srpska police there as well, and which is a really big reminder of their past, of all the troubles and I would say traumas that they had to go through as human beings. So I will stop here, and over to you, Emir.
Okay, I'm sorry. I hope you can hear me now. I guess I'm unmuted. Well, I would like to look at the return from another sort of perspective. You know, what is it that the returnees are coming back to? And they're coming back to a completely different, completely changed political geography. The names of the streets are different. The symbols are different. The alphabet is completely different, and they're made to, forced to make to feel like they are actually coming back to another country, like they're coming back to other people's country, something that doesn't belong to them, and somewhere where they're not homegrown too, if I can put it that way. And that is something that is, and it's done through various means. It's on a daily basis. It's a production of a sort of a completely new reality, the physical reality. You know, when you're on the way to Srebrenica from Sarajevo, you have to pass by a Serb flag, you know, next to the road, welcoming you to Republika Srpska. You know, the territory itself is very clearly marked, and that's what the returnees are coming back to. And that has not changed. If anything, it has become a lot worse as time passed by. Thank you.
I'll move on to another question, and we'll see if there's
Thank you.
time. Thanks, David. This next question is actually for Anne. For about a decade, the most prolific publishers about the genocide in Bosnia were primarily mental health academics. I noticed this while I was finishing my MSW, actually at Loyola University in 2012. And so did many others, including community members in Chicago in particular, who were interviewed frequently by these academics. So there's a painful history there between mental health researchers using stories from survivors that they later pathologize for their own research and then leaving never to be seen again. And as an academic and a social worker yourself, how did you prepare yourself and what kind of questions did you ask yourself about this project, knowing the power that you had as a researcher and as an English speaker?
Ida, thank you for that question. That's one of the best questions that I've ever been asked about this project. And I've also seen what you've described, sadly, of how positions of power, I think, are used sometimes in a totally self-serving way. And one of the biggest concerns I had in starting this project and throughout this project was the ethics involved in it. And were we doing it right? Were we doing it in a way that was the least re-traumatizing, if you will, for the people whose stories there were? And were we doing it in a way that ultimately we could elevate people's personal narratives? Because if you control the narrative, of course, you control the truth. And if we could elevate those in a way that was respectful and complete, and in a way that many of these people who survived could not do for themselves because of language, because of so many things. And so, you know, I talked with Hasan on and on about this, and still do, about this question of is it okay to do it? And also that I felt, you know, I could see how hard it was for him in this process, and wondered about that and talked about that. So I guess I would say that ultimately Hasan convinced me that something that I know, but had to believe, that people can decide what they want to do in terms of telling their story, and the trust that everybody had in Hasan, and as I said, then subsequently in me, and some of these people I have known for a long time, that we wanted to, as I said earlier, do this in a way that we could talk about people in their entirety and how amazing they are, and not just focus on the atrocities, and as you say, not to pathologize, because their spirit and their generosity of spirit and their resilience and all of that is something that is so important to tell. So I guess I would just say that I think anybody who's ever doing anything in a culture that is not their own needs to do so only in partnership with people whose story it is or who are part of the community, and to constantly assess whether we're doing it right and for the right reasons.
I love that. Thank you so much. Jessica, I believe you have a question as well.
Yes, I have a question for Hasan. In reading this book, so many survivors spoke about destiny and in their testimonies. And as a survivor, do you feel the same way about how they do about destiny? What were your thoughts on that, hearing it so many times in your interviews?
So what I'm going to say now, it's my personal belief. From the start of the Dead March, I felt sort of an inner voice telling me that I need to try to reach the front of the Dead March, and that will save me. And I followed that inner voice all the time, and I was saved. And from everything what happened in my life and what I do at the memorial and everything, I think, you know, all that I call destiny. You know, that is my role in this world, and I'm just playing that role. And from my experience with mothers, talking about their resilience and how come that, you know, like the entire families of theirs were killed, sons and husbands, and they still have they still are alive and they still go on with their lives, like Saliha, which Dr. David Pettigrew mentioned. These mothers, they believe in destiny. They think that there is afterlife. There is a better world of justice, where all these injustices will be rectified ultimately, and this actually keeps them alive. And the fact that they are alive and that they are, from my experience working on oral history, mothers never, when I ask them if they want to tell their story, I almost never got an answer no from mothers, because they totally understand, what happened to them, and why that happened, and they do everything to keep the memory alive of the family. Saliha had returned where she lives now just because of the memory and dedication to her family, and she knows that one day she will pass, that she will die, but the memory of her family and that dedication, that the storytelling, will always be remembered and will always be there. So I don't know if this is the answer to your question.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for answering that. Do we want to do questions from the audience?
I could ask one more question if there's time. I wanted to ask if you could reflect on the special dedication that survivors have and that allies have to telling the truth about the genocide. When I met with Mother Saliha, she said she had a pact with Hatija that whoever passed first, the other would continue to pray for the families and to tell the truth about the genocide. And I was with a group of young people from Emmaus in Potocari, who there was they go to see her periodically to help her in her isolation. There was a nurse and a social worker and the young driver who sort of plays the role of everybody's son. Everyone says, "You remind me of my son who was killed." And when we were leaving, it's Bernice Adamovich. When we were leaving, he asked Mother Saliha if she had a message for me. And she said something like, "I don't care what Professor does as long as he keeps telling the truth." But these words, this word truth, and as a path to justice, really I think has an important meaning, a special meaning for genocide survivors. So I wondered if you could reflect on the importance of our work of telling the truth, especially in the face of denial. In the last year and a half, we witnessed, for example, the Nobel Prize in Literature being awarded to someone who glorifies Serb ultranationalism and denies the Srebrenica genocide. And recently there was a banner in, I believe in Bratunac, with the likeness of Ratko Mladic, congratulating him on his birthday. So I think the book, which I think Emir was also alluding to, is part of this dedication to making the truth known to as many people as possible. So that's really for everyone.
Maybe Emir should go ahead first.
I really shouldn't, because once again, this is your book. But I don't want, this is the second time you're saying this, so I don't want to. Now, that's the question that you've asked, David, is something that I guess is a generational issue, to be honest. It's a very And it also has with the fact, once again, the scariest number tonight is number that anyone had spoken is number 10. Because when Anne said that out of thousands of men and boys that had been lined up to be executed, only 10 have survived. So there's so few of us who have actually made it out alive. And I guess, the truth telling comes from an inner call, from an inner, from this inner drive to ensure that what you had seen and what you had testified to is not forgotten. And it's a very human drive. It couldn't be more human. We all want to be, we all want our lives to make sense. And sometimes they only make sense if we manage to position our lives in the larger history of what's going on around us. And I guess that's partly what we're doing. But to be honest, it's also very personal. It's not everybody's doing this, and this is not fun work, people. Hasan has just interviewed 100 survivors who have given him interviews lasting in the range of from 3 to 8 hours. It's not fun work, okay? It's very hard work. It takes your life and your substance out of you. And we were joking, joking. We're having a conversation when Hasan was in the middle of that project, and I was telling him, listen, do something, take a week off, do something. I don't know what does it for you, if it's praying or drinking or whatever it does for you, just do it, okay? Don't come back. I don't want to see you. And it's not. It takes a special kind of courage, and it takes a special kind of strength to do that on a daily basis. And I think that's why we need to appreciate people like Hasan more than we actually do, and people who are now very young men and women who are now actually working with Hasan. And once again, that's what we need to keep in mind when we're talking about that. This is where truth telling comes from, David. It's both personal, but it's also, again, it's also a personal need to once again position yourself in history somehow. I don't know if it makes sense, but that's it.
I don't know if Hasan or Anne would like to respond.
So if you ask me as a survivor, why I'm actually doing this, from the day on, my main reason is my father, my twin brother, and everyone else who was killed. Just thinking about, how innocent they were and how they were murdered for nothing, as animals. They could not even have water to sip before they were murdered and thrown in mass graves like animals. And thinking about their suffering, is more than enough reason for me to keep doing this as long as I can. And I've noticed that survivors, some of them who are actually doing this, have this unbelievable passion and energy. And I'm hoping that we will pass this drive to the younger generation, who will carry on what we are doing, because the world needs to know these stories. And from interviewing these people in our oral history project, and every day I'm working on these stories. You can't stop thinking about what happened to these people, and just think and think. And I always say that the world needs to know this, because there's just a little out there that we know, and mainly people discuss the facts, the ICTY trials. There are a few stories online and some academical discussions, but the real stories of survivors are more than needed, and these stories will really make big difference at our memorial, because the purpose of the memorial, as I understand it, is to create an empathy among visitors through or by using these stories. So we'll do our best to use them ethically, to use them, at the extent that they should be used.
Thank you.
I would just like to add something to that quickly, and that is that if you think about even just as one person who's had some sort of unjust something done to us as one person, how very, very hard it is to continue to move toward any sort of healing or life moving forward if nobody believes you. And so when you multiply that to not just what happened individually with everybody, but collectively and cumulatively, and then this culture of denial where people are having to fight for their voice to be heard, it's unimaginable the scale of that. And so that's why those of us who can need to help get the word out, if you will, and tell these stories and continue to tell these stories so that the truth can be told. Because there has to be a way to counter the organized official denial machine, if you will. And so I would just encourage everybody who can to learn more about this and to make sure people know about it, as well as I said earlier, to keep a close watch on what's happening in our very own lives and what we can do about that.
Thank you, Anne. And that's kind of a perfect segue into one of the questions that we have from the audience. It's actually about kind of the reconciliation process in Bosnia and how, what's the current environment. And Hasan spoke about, younger generations, how is the reconciliation process going in Bosnia? Do you see it, getting better or worse, or anyone can answer?
The Bosnians need to answer this one.
If I may, then very briefly before Hasan takes the floor, there was a time when I had hope for reconciliation. I mean, however you want to phrase it, however you want to understand it. There was a time I had hope that we'd be able to have a conversation about this. However, we are decreasingly the space for conversation of any sort is shrinking and keeps shrinking, and has been under attack for about a decade now, or even a little longer. But then again, what is reconciliation? We've never established what it really means in the Bosnian context. And for me, and I'll sort of conclude this by telling you a little story. I mean, this is what reconciliation is to me. A Serb family who had lived in Srebrenica before the war, left Srebrenica, and then came back after the war, called us on the phone the other day, contacted us, and said that they had found a stash of letters, photographs, and other documents of Bosniak refugees who had lived in their house, and that they would like to donate it to the Srebrenica Memorial Center. And I was so happy about it. I was truly actually happy, not only because there were quite important documents there, but that they actually did that they made the step to help us return the owners of those letters, and those likenesses on those photographs to humanity, and to return humanity to them again. And that's what reconciliation. This is the single most important step in terms of reconciliation that I've seen in the last 15 years. Somebody making this sort of small but symbolic step and crossing across, and making it across that line, based on the basis of common humanity. This is that I was once again. So that's again the I guess the long and the short of it.
So, from, my work at the memorial, I had so many of these questions. So, usually people in public space speak about this without a profound understanding from the practical side, what's actually happening in between real people, So I would say that, when people started to return here, so their fellow neighbors, Serbs, did not even dare to greet them. So they had to run away from them, fearing their authorities, because somebody will see that and tell them, so they will be punished or whatever. So that situation hasn't changed much on a different scale. Emir has mentioned this example. How come that the place where the genocide happened, where they have physical proof, where they have over 7,000 tombstones on the side of the road through which they are passing, they actually don't do something more in terms of like telling us how come what happened, how come that after 26 years after the genocide, we are still looking for over 1,000 of mortal remains of our loved ones, and there is no a single example of our neighbors here living in Srebrenica who told us that there is a mass grave hidden somewhere. So I believe that there are people who know, there are people who they told about these secrets, and they keep their mouth shut. And there are many secrets that they never are going to tell us. And and we are surprised if there is a single gesture like this stash of personal belongings from families of victims, that so somebody had conscience to pass it on those who take care of that memory. So this is about practical relations of people living side by side. I would say, in Srebrenica, there is, I call this culture of silence. For an outsider, you come here, everything is so surreal, beautiful, but you have to spend some time to understand that there are divided communities, who go to different coffee bars, who have different narratives, colliding narratives. Some, even if you go to take a cab, that cab driver might be executioner who killed your family, and he greets you in the morning, say hi, and you say hi back because you don't know. We don't have that list of those participants, we don't know their names. And on the political level, not many things had changed. It's all the political rhetorics, that there are necessary steps that had to be undertaken for a genuine reconciliation. Denial is the wall, between the groups and needing to reconcile. So as long as there is denial, it's impossible to reconcile. And and later, there are a number of steps that have to be taken, to educate, to admit the rule of the states, of the regime, and to educate, to provide curriculums in schools, to pass laws to ban denial, and to actually tackle all the issues that the society is facing regarding the terrible past. So none of this has been done in either Serbia or Republika Srpska, where we live now. It actually reflects on the relations of ordinary people. If politicians decide to go to a genuine process of reconciliation, ordinary people would follow those decisions. And as I always say, the decisions to commit genocide were made by elites, by political and military. And if ordinary people are told to admit genocides, to tell the truth about the past, they would do that, But they are silent and they keep secrets because they are told by those elites to keep their mouth shut, because it's in their national interest to hide the truth about mass graves and everything else which is related to our loved ones and to this genocide. So it is very, I would say, complicated thing.
Thank you. Well, I think we've covered a lot. Ida, do you think so much? And it was just such a great program. I thank all of you for being here today. I encourage everybody to read the book, buy the book, and, and support the Srebrenica Memorial Center and go to Srebrenica. And I thank all of you for taking the time to be here. So there's going to be a link put in the chat for an evaluation, a survey to get your feedback. I think Raheem is going to put that in. And then we have upcoming virtual programs. We have a film discussion, The Windermere Children, with in partnership with the WTTW on Thursday, April 1st. And then we have a lunch and learn, envisioning an education our communities deserve, the impact of systematic and institutional racism in education. So again, thank you all. It was an amazing program. So Ida, do you want to say any last words?
I'd love to. Well, first I want to thank you, Jessica. Thank you for helping us organize this together, and the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. I would also like to thank Emir Suljagić and Hasan Hasanović and Anne Petrila and the Srebrenica Memorial Center, and of course, Dr. David Pettigrew. Thank you also to our community partners. I just wanted to give a shout out here because they did quite a lot of work for us. So War Childhood Museum, Educator Institute for Human Rights, Together We Remember, Yale Genocide Studies Program, the Advisory Council for Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bosnian North American Women's Association, the Hero Center, Center for Bosnian Studies at Fontbonne University, and the Congress of North American Bosniaks for their support. I would also like to say we must continue to tell the truth, to speak the truth, much like we've been talking about today, right? And to learn about the genocide and how it can be prevented. So I strongly encourage our attendees to purchase this book. Go out and get this book. Educate your family, educate your friends about the genocide in Bosnia. And as we dedicated this program to the victims of the Srebrenica genocide, we thank you for being present in honoring their memory today, and keep doing this work. Keep educating folks. Thank you so much.